1 Corinthians 10, and we're going to read verses 6 to 13. Well, let's just get the flow of it and go from verse 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. So as I said this morning, I just want to spend a little bit of time thinking about some of the knock-on effects of learning about the temptation of Jesus. What does it mean for us? What are the implications of that? And initially I wanted to talk from Hebrews chapter 2, which was the verse that we finished with this morning. But maybe we'll get to that if we're going to have our Bible studies in Hebrews. So not so much perhaps emphasis on that. And I got a bit more stuck on this passage here, and thought that was a useful thing to look at. Particularly, so we're seeing these things are written down, we're learning from others, and we are to take the warning of how people fell into temptation. And it's verse 13 that particularly I want to dissect a bit. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. It's one of those sort of double negatives, isn't it? That sounds a bit more complicated than perhaps we understand it. And it's really saying that if you're tempted, you're in good company. We saw that this morning. Jesus was tempted. So if Jesus was tempted, we've got to be kidding if we're saying, no, I don't suffer from temptation. I'm never tempted to do wrong. I'm done with sin. There are those who have claimed that in the past, the holiness movement, who claim to some sort of a perfection. So they were no longer troubled by sin. They're done with it. And that's not the teaching of the Bible, is it? Paul is very clearly saying to these believers here that temptation is going to be a part of your life. Temptation to sin, temptation to rebel. But with that temptation is an opportunity. I suppose any temptation is an opportunity, isn't it? To choose, I'm going to go away from God, or I'm going to go towards God. And we need to bear in mind that as Christians, we should be taking that choice to experience more of God's faithfulness when we're tempted. However sore the temptation may be, God's faithfulness is greater. He desires that our faith should be an enduring faith. Faith that's based on the truth about him, the truth he has revealed in his word. He wants us to be joyfully growing in that enduring faith. And that's why he lovingly permits times of temptation, so that our faith might be fully steadfast. Turn with me just to James chapter 1, probably verses you might expect me to have turned to when we're talking about this idea of testing and faithfulness, steadfastness. James gets right to the point early on in his letter. He's hardly sort of finished saying who he's writing to before he's straight into this issue. James chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That's not in any way contradicting what I just said about the perfectionism movement, but God is moving us towards that point of perfection. But that will be, I think, the Bible tells us at the end of our lives, when we're made complete. But he moves us forward towards that through times of testing. And testing helps us to become more saturated in steadfastness, if you like. Yeah, so maybe we think we're steadfast, but we'll really know it if we've passed through a time of testing, drawing on the faithfulness of God and through his word. Then we'll know, yes, God has enabled me to stay the course. It was tough. I had choices to make. But by the grace of God, I chose the right way. You can see we rejoice, we go towards those times of testing, not seeking them out. It's not right to try and put God to the test in that way. But when they're coming, we greet them in a sense and say, well, this is going to be an opportunity. This is for my joy, for my growth, for my steadfastness, for the glory of God. It's quite a different perspective, isn't it? That we would tend to shrink back from things that are tough and testing. But James is very clear, isn't it? Count it all joy. Paul's been saying, you use this as an opportunity to remind yourself of your vulnerability and of God's faithfulness. These testing times, these temptations that come, are fuel to a living hope. Because as we have God working faithfully in us, purposefully in us, through these times of testing, by faith we'll see that this is about dealing with things that are not yet dealt with. That refining process. We won't turn to it, but you know the passage there in 1 Peter. He talks about trials, tests, particularly persecutions in that context, being like that refining work, burning off all of the dross as a refiner of metals would do, so that what comes forth would be the pure gold, the pure silver that comes through the fire. That endures, even though the flame is hot. Temptations we will feel the heat. We can see that they're going to be burning up what is dishonorable, what is out of place in the life of somebody who is called by a holy God to reflect his holiness. So there's that issue of submission, isn't there? We're tempted. This is a test. This feels very costly. This feels more than we can bear. But Lord, you are refining. You are purifying. You are burning away things that I'm struggling to see for myself. And as you do that, I will see just how great your salvation is that bit more clearly than perhaps I did before the test, before the temptation came. So it's a common problem. Temptation. Don't think that you're a special case and that therefore you have to use a monopoly phrase, I suppose, a get out of jail free card. Oh, well, I'm suffering this temptation, so therefore there's nothing I can do about it because I'm special. No. All the temptations that you face have been faced before. And when we think of Jesus, in a really ultimate sense, he faced those temptations. So there's no excuse to say we can't endure. God is faithful, and he will give us what we need in those temptations. But it goes on, doesn't it? So, verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you. It's not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Not tempted beyond your ability. Whose definition of your ability? That's often the problem, isn't it? When we look at this verse, or when we face temptation, we say, I'm not able. We give in. It's too strong. The temptation, the rewards that are offered and down that path, they hold such a power over us. I've got to go that way. I can't resist. I'm not able. But God says, you are able. And he knows. And through that temptation, he's growing your ability to resist. In his grace, I think that's what he's doing. So we might have an idea of how far we can be tempted, but really we're limiting the power and faithfulness of God to help us. So I think sometimes in temptation, God is showing us, actually, you are far more able to resist because of my grace and my word than you give yourself credit for. So you see God's good fatherly nature towards us. You know, a father with a child, perhaps, and I can't do it, Dad. Yes, you can. Just try riding the bike or whatever task is in hand, helping them to face their fears, helping them to grow in their ability alongside them, with them. But they must do it. Our Father knows what we can accomplish in his grace. And so he will bring our ability to face temptation up through that testing. Our God is good. You know, we mustn't read this verse and say, picture God somehow as some cynically calculating. Oh, yes, I'm going to push them that far, and then they're going to really suffer. God is not being cruel through bringing these times of testing. And to use my language carefully, I mean, God doesn't tempt us with evil, but he does permit and use those times of temptation. God does test us through circumstances, and the Bible uses these different words sometimes interchangeably. So if I get my words wrong, you'll hope you understand the gist of what I mean. So if God says we're not going to be tempted beyond our ability, we have to trust his assessment, don't we? And go into temptation in confidence in him, not saying, can I make it? Don't give in because we think it's too much. And I don't know about you, but when we're talking about when I'm thinking about my own struggle with temptation, the problem is that I've already given in before I've even realised I've been tempted. Yeah, you've been had before you even realise you're being taken down that line. Whatever situation it might be, we know that in life sometimes, don't we? But in our spiritual walk, we've fallen before we've even realised that's the path we're going down. Too easily we have that habitual idolatry. That seems to be the theme here, doesn't it? That these believers were falling into the sin of idolatry. Though they'd been saved by the transforming grace of Christ and had the power of the Spirit at work in their lives, yet they were being tempted to just carry on with their old ways of idolatry as if nothing had changed. The lure, the habit was so strong. We can adopt old practices or the practices of our culture so readily, can't we? And be idolaters without really noticing. That's a danger, isn't it? We need to take heed. If we think we stand, we think we're all right, we're not being tempted. Actually, we are being tempted and we are falling time and time again, and we're hardly even noticing. Well, no temptation's overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. We can endure persecution, and testing and temptation. We can endure it because God always provides that way of escape in his faithfulness. And that's what we're going to go on and think about in a minute.